Imagine losing everything: your success, your wealth, your place in the world. Now, picture yourself standing at the very bottom, overlooked and forgotten. What would you do if the world turned its back on you? Meet Elijah Cross, a man who once had it all, but when life knocked him down, he chose to rise again, not with money or power, but with something far more powerful: his words. His journey from despair to hope begins in the most unexpected of places, the shadows of a bridge. Through simple yet profound messages written on the walls of his city, Elijah starts a movement that no one saw coming. How far can a single person's words go? Can they spark change? Can they heal the broken? Find out in this inspiring story of resilience, redemption, and the power of one man's voice. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Tell us what you think Elijah's message means to you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The Man Beneath the Bridge is the powerful story of Elijah Cross, a man who once lived a life of luxury and success as a thriving entrepreneur, only to lose it all. Struggling with despair and feeling forgotten, Elijah finds himself living under a bridge in a small Montana town, cut off from the world he once knew. Yet, in his lowest moments, he begins writing motivational words on the city walls, quietly offering messages of hope, strength, and resilience to anyone who will listen. As these words begin to resonate with strangers, Elijah's story goes viral, and people from all walks of life are drawn to his raw, authentic voice. But the man behind the messages is more than just an anonymous figure. He is a former business visionary, a man who is reclaiming his purpose and seeking redemption not through wealth, but through the power of his words. The Man Beneath the Bridge is a journey of transformation, not just for Elijah but for everyone he touches. It's a story about overcoming adversity, finding strength in silence, and rediscovering purpose in a world that often overlooks those who need it most. With its deep exploration of resilience, vulnerability, and the power of hope, this story will inspire anyone who has ever faced hardship and wondered if they could rise again. Join Elijah on a path of self-discovery and watch how one man's words can ignite a movement that changes everything. One wall, one person, one message at a time. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional and is intended for motivational and inspirational purposes only. The characters, events, and situations depicted in The Man Beneath the Bridge are the product of creative storytelling, and any resemblance to real-life persons or events is purely coincidental. The video aims to provide valuable moral lessons, encouragement, and insights on resilience, overcoming adversity, and the power of words. While the story is fictional, the lessons it conveys are meant to inspire, provoke thought, and offer guidance in navigating life's challenges. Please note that the content shared in this video is not intended as professional advice and should not be treated as such. Always seek appropriate support and guidance for personal issues from qualified professionals. The wind in Helena, Montana, carried a certain kind of loneliness. It howled low through the alleyways and crept beneath overpasses like it was looking for forgotten things. Beneath one such bridge on the edge of the city, nestled behind concrete pillars and discarded shopping carts, lived a man who had long since fallen off the edge of memory. His name was Elijah Cross. Most people didn't know it. Most people didn't even look him in the eye. To them, he was a shadow in a frayed coat, a face behind a dirty beard. Another homeless man in a city too small to ignore but too proud to acknowledge the broken. He had made this spot his home, an old green tarp strung between beams, a blanket weathered thin by Montana winters, and a battered notebook wrapped in plastic to protect it from the snow. He didn't beg. He didn't speak much. He walked the city before the sun came up, then returned before the world fully awoke. And each morning he left behind words. Not just any words. They were carved in chalk or sprayed with paint, sometimes in small letters tucked into the corner of a wall, sometimes stretched across wide brick canvases with boldness and purpose. They read like whispers from someone who had seen the bottom and refused to stay there. You are not what they say you are. Even the coldest night cannot stop the dawn. Your fall is not your final chapter. The people of Helena noticed. At first, they scoffed or dismissed the messages as the ramblings of a desperate man. But slowly, steadily, the city began to change. A waitress saw a quote on the wall across from the diner and decided not to quit her job. A teenager battling depression took a photo of a message outside her school and posted it online. It went viral. Others followed. Soon, the chalk graffiti became something more. A movement. People started calling the anonymous writer the Flame, because every message ended with a small hand-drawn symbol of fire. But while the city buzzed with curiosity about the mysterious figure lighting their walls with hope, Elijah remained in the shadows. Under the bridge, wrapped in his coat, writing in silence. He remembered the taste of luxury, the hum of glass elevators, the boardrooms where his voice once carried weight. But that was another life, buried under betrayal, lawsuits, and the cruel collapse of everything he had built. Now he lived in a place where words were all he had left, and somehow they were enough. Each night, he wandered through the city with his notebook, choosing his next canvas with care. He passed bars that reeked of regret, schools pulsing with quiet anxiety, and churches where people prayed but didn't always believe. Every wall became a stage. Every phrase a quiet rebellion. One morning, just before the sun lit the sleeping rooftops, Elijah knelt beneath the side of a rundown theater and wrote, "You are allowed to start over. And this time you are allowed to win." Then he walked away, invisible as always. But this message, this one didn't disappear into the noise. This one would change everything. The city was waking up when Jade Monroe walked past the old theater downtown. Her headphones buzzed low with lo-fi beats as she pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, breath fogging in front of her. She had just missed her bus again, which was becoming a habit. At 17, life felt like a long series of missed connections. She stopped in her tracks when her eyes landed on the writing sprawled across the cracked theater wall. "You are allowed to start over. And this time you are allowed to win." There was something about it. Not just the words but the way they hit her. Like someone had written them specifically for her, knowing the exact weight she carried. She stepped back, framed the message with her phone camera, and snapped a photo. She didn't know what made her do it. Maybe it was the aching need to share something beautiful in a world that so often felt heavy. She posted it to her social media with a simple caption, "Found this in Helena today. Needed this." Then she kept walking. By the time she got home that evening, the post had been shared over 10,000 times. People began to tag their own discoveries of similar phrases. Hashtag Words on the Wind became a digital breadcrumb trail of inspiration. Some were written on snow-covered dumpsters. Others on the backs of abandoned buildings or hidden behind parking garages. All were unsigned except for the small hand-drawn flame in the corner. By the end of the week, a popular lifestyle influencer reposted Jade's photo, calling it street poetry for the soul. News outlets picked up the story, wondering who this mysterious writer was. The messages were everywhere now, spreading not just through Montana but across the country. People began to replicate the style in their own cities. Yet no one could find the original source. Elijah, meanwhile, sat beneath the bridge, unaware of the storm he had stirred. He still rose before sunrise, still walked the empty streets, and still chose his walls carefully. His notebook had grown thick with unused phrases, words he hadn't yet found the courage to share. One evening, as snow began to fall, Elijah stood outside a closed bakery and stared at the blank brick wall beside it. He pulled out his chalk and began to write. "You are not broken. You are becoming." He paused, the cold seeping into his fingertips. He looked down at the small flame he always drew and wondered, just for a moment, if it still meant anything. If anyone saw it. If anyone cared. The next day, a local news van parked beside the bakery. The anchor pointed to the message as if it were sacred scripture. "Whoever is writing these," she said into the camera, "is changing lives." Elijah watched the segment from the display window of an electronics store. He stood quietly on the sidewalk, coat zipped to his chin, watching his own words being discussed by strangers. There was no joy in his eyes. No pride. Only a quiet, complicated ache. He didn't want to be seen. He only wanted to remind people they mattered. Later that night, as he sat beneath the bridge, the city muffled above him, Elijah pulled out his notebook and flipped through pages of forgotten quotes. He read one aloud just to hear it echo off the concrete. "You are the author of what comes next." The wind howled back in reply, curling through the beams like it understood. And still, the world kept searching for the man behind the flame. The sky cracked open over Helena with a storm that had no patience. Heavy snow fell in sheets, burying sidewalks, silencing traffic, and driving most people indoors. It was the kind of storm that forced even the stubborn to pause, to hunker down and wait for the weather to pass. But Elijah had no doors to shut, no fireplace to sit beside. Just layers of clothing, a tarp that flapped violently against the cold wind, and the determination to keep moving. He had survived worse. Not just the weather but things far colder, betrayal, humiliation, silence. He stayed dry as long as he could, tucked in the shadows beneath the overpass, watching headlights pass above like distant stars. The city that had once ignored him was now echoing with his words, and yet he remained faceless. The flame, they called him. They speculated about his identity like he was some myth, a troubled poet, a grieving artist, a preacher without a pulpit. But he was none of those things. He was a man who had burned brightly once, only to be doused by the world's indifference and greed. That night the storm worsened. The cold dug into his bones, stinging his skin. His breath came in harsh clouds as he tried to warm his hands against his chest. He needed to move to get his blood flowing to escape the gnawing chill. So he rose. He walked. He headed toward the city, legs unsteady but heart stubborn. Past closed storefronts and icy sidewalks, beneath flickering street lamps and snow-heavy trees. He was searching for a wall, a canvas, something to speak to, someone to reach. And he found it. An old bus station wall, blank and waiting. With trembling hands he pulled a piece of charcoal from his pocket. Chalk wouldn't hold in this weather, but charcoal was faithful. It left a mark even in the storm. He scrawled the words slowly, painfully across the cold surface. There is a fire in you that no storm can drown. But before he could draw the flame, his legs gave out. He collapsed. A blur of snow. A thud of flesh against concrete. The wind wailed on, indifferent. Hours passed before someone found him. The morning sun rose over a quiet, white city. A bus driver making an early route spotted the shape near the station. He pulled over and rushed out, calling for help. An ambulance came quickly, its sirens muted by the snow. Elijah was unconscious. Frostbitten fingers. Weak pulse. Hypothermia biting through his core. He was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, still wearing the coat he'd worn for years. Inside one of its deep pockets was a notebook wrapped in plastic. A nurse named Tanya found it while searching for identification. She flipped it open, expecting grocery lists or scraps of memory. What she found instead were pages upon pages of handwritten quotes. Some were raw, some were refined, but all carried that same fire she'd seen on the walls around town. At the bottom corner of each page was the tiny symbol of the flame. Her hands began to tremble. It was him. He wasn't a myth or a movement. He was a man. And now he was here, flesh and bone and story, right in front of them. The discovery swept through the hospital like electricity. A local journalist caught wind of it from a friend in the emergency department. By nightfall, the headlines were already circling. The flame found, mysterious street writer hospitalized after blizzard. Photos of Elijah, blurry but unmistakable, began to surface. People recognized his face, not from the streets but from somewhere else. Somewhere familiar if distant. An old magazine cover surfaced. A younger, polished version of Elijah graced it, wearing a crisp suit and confident smile. The headline read, "Elijah Cross, the visionary behind Ardent Labs." And suddenly everything changed. Not just for the city, but for the man beneath the bridge. The news spread across Helena like wildfire in dry brush. The man everyone knew only through his words, the one they had turned into a symbol, now had a name. Elijah Cross. A name once etched in the tech world, now whispered across hospital corridors and cafe counters. People scrambled to put the pieces together. Ardent Labs. The broadband company that had promised to connect rural America to high-speed internet. 5 years ago, Elijah Cross was at the center of it all. Praised as a visionary, celebrated in business circles for his innovation and idealism. A black man from Mississippi who had built something powerful in the heart of Montana. But then came the collapse. Legal troubles. Accusations. Partnerships gone sour. Investors pulling out. And Elijah vanished. Until now. Tanya, the nurse who found the notebook, sat beside his bed as he slowly began to recover. His eyelids fluttered against the hospital light. His voice, when it returned, was rough and low, like wind scraping across gravel. "You opened it," he murmured. She nodded. "The words saved more people than you'll ever know." He didn't reply. Just stared at the ceiling, eyes unfocused, as if trying to piece together who he used to be and who he had become. After a moment, he whispered, "I never meant to be found." "You were never lost," she said softly. "Just unheard." Outside, cameras waited. Reporters loitered in parking lots, hungry for a glimpse of the mysterious man turned legend. News vans from across the state parked outside St. Joseph's. But Elijah refused all interviews. He didn't want to be a symbol. He didn't want to be pitted. He didn't want to relive the pain of watching his life unravel. Then came a letter. A handwritten envelope, slipped in by a young receptionist. It was from Jade. Inside she had written, "You saved me and you don't even know it. I was going to quit everything. School, art, life. Then I saw your words, and I started breathing again. Thank you." Please keep speaking. We need you." Below the signature was a tiny flame. Elijah folded the letter carefully and placed it beside his bed. Days passed. He grew stronger. Doctors spoke of releasing him. Social workers offered housing options. A lawyer showed up, pro bono, saying he wanted to help Elijah regain his rights to some of his old intellectual property. But none of it moved him quite like Jade's letter had. It was the first time in years someone had written to him not because of what he built or what he lost, but because of what he gave. That night he finally allowed one visitor. It was a local journalist named Maren Fields, known for her quiet, thoughtful profiles. She entered the room with no camera, no microphone, just a notebook. "I'm not here to sell your story," she said. "I'm here to help you tell it, if you want to." He stared at her a long time. Then slowly he nodded. Maren asked him nothing at first. Instead she listened. As he spoke, his voice grew steadier. He talked about Arden Labs. About how he had believed in building bridges, both literal and digital. About how a corporate partner gutted the company after convincing him to go public. About the legal traps, the betrayals, and the avalanche of silence that followed. But more than that, he spoke of the nights beneath the bridge. The people he'd met. The quiet dignity of those who had nothing. And the moment he realized that while he had lost his business, his money, and his platform, he had not lost his voice. He just had to find a different way to use it. 2 weeks later, Maren's article was published. It wasn't flashy. It didn't glorify his fall. It told the truth, the raw human truth, of a man who had been buried by circumstance and clawed his way back to purpose through the power of his own words. The story went national. And for the first time, Elijah Cross stepped into the light. Not as the flame, not as a broken tech mogul, but as a man reborn by fire. The invitations poured in faster than Elijah could process them. Television interviews, speaking engagements, non-profit collaborations, book deals. A famous motivational speaker in New York even offered him a co-host spot on a national podcast series. But Elijah wasn't chasing fame. Not now. Maybe not ever again. He said no to almost everything. But there was one invitation that felt different. It came from Helena High School. The principal, a reserved woman named Celeste Hargrove, reached out personally. She didn't lead with flattery or numbers. Just honesty. "Our students are struggling," her letter read. "We use your words in our hallways, in classrooms, even in counseling sessions. Would you come speak to them, not as a celebrity but as yourself?" That was all it took. A month after leaving the hospital, Elijah stepped onto a stage inside the school gymnasium. The walls were lined with posters featuring his phrases. His face, aged and worn but strong, was no longer a mystery. He wore a simple sweater and jeans. No fancy suit. No teleprompter. Just a chair, a microphone, and the truth. The room quieted when he sat down. He looked out at the sea of young faces. Some curious, some skeptical, some already lit up with recognition. And then he began. "I used to live under a bridge not far from here," he said. "I spent nights listening to the wind scrape across concrete and wondering if I'd ever matter again." He told them about the rise, about Arden Labs, about believing he could change the world and watching it crumble. He didn't dress it up or make it pretty. He told them the truth, that success can be stolen, that the world can be unfair, but also, that none of that means you're finished. "I thought I was invisible," he said. "And then I picked up a piece of chalk." He talked about the first message he wrote. How he didn't know if anyone would see it. How he wrote anyway because hope wasn't something he could keep buried any longer. "You don't need to be famous to make an impact," he told them. "You just need to speak when silence is the easy choice." Afterward, the auditorium erupted in applause, not the loud, chaotic kind, but something softer, something more reverent. Some students cried. Others sat still, letting it soak in. In the days that followed, more schools reached out. Universities, correctional facilities, shelters. People didn't just want Elijah's words, they wanted him. But he refused to become a brand again. He kept his circle small. He spoke when it felt right. He rested when it didn't. And he kept writing. With the help of a local artist collective, Elijah launched a citywide project called Voices in the Wind. It was simple. Paint and preserve inspirational quotes on buildings across Montana, signed only with the flame. But now it wasn't just his words. Others joined in. Teachers, students, single mothers, veterans, former addicts, all contributing their voices, their truths, their sparks. The bridge where Elijah once slept was cleaned, restored, and painted over with a massive mural. At the center of it was a quote from his notebook. The darkness taught me how to glow. Below it, in small but steady letters, Elijah Cross. The city never looked at him the same again. Not because they pitied him, but because they remembered him. They remembered the fire. It was a crisp spring evening when Elijah returned to the bridge. Not to stay, not to mourn, but to remember. The river below ran soft with melted snow. The mural above shimmered in fading sunlight. He stood there for a long time, hands in his coat pockets, watching people walk past without fear. Kids on bikes, a couple holding hands, a jogger nodding in respect as she passed. This place had changed, and so had he. The once forgotten man beneath the bridge was now a symbol of resilience, but more importantly, he was a man in motion. Not a relic, not an echo. A living, breathing reminder of what it meant to fall and rise again. That night, he sat on a bench near the bridge, pulled out his weathered notebook and turned to a blank page. He didn't write a quote this time. He began sketching something bigger. A new idea. A new flame. The national attention hadn't slowed. If anything, it had grown stronger. But Elijah had learned to walk beside it rather than chase it. With help from a few partners, some who had once watched him fall and others who were meeting him now for the first time, he launched a program called The Fire Within. It was part mentorship, part writing workshop, and part community support network. It centered around one belief, that everyone has something to say, even if they don't know how to say it yet. He traveled, but only when it mattered. In Missoula, he spoke to a group of formerly incarcerated men who now worked in construction. In Billings, he led a workshop for foster teens. In Bozeman, he stood before a crowd of entrepreneurs and told them not about profit margins, but about purpose. And through it all, he kept his notebook close. Every page was filled with words waiting to be shared. But he wasn't the only one writing now. Across the country, murals inspired by his movement bloomed like wildflowers in concrete jungles. On the side of a New Orleans diner, "Your story isn't over just because it hurts." In a Detroit alleyway, "Even in silence, your spirit speaks." In a Chicago subway tunnel, "Keep building even if no one claps." They all bore the flame. Some thought Elijah had created a brand, a movement, a message, but the truth was simpler. He had sparked a reminder that being seen wasn't about fame, that being heard wasn't about volume, that healing didn't always roar, it sometimes whispered. He never took credit for the way the world had caught fire. He only kept tending to his corner of it, quietly, steadily, purposefully. Jade, now in college and studying graphic design, worked with him on visual campaigns. She was the one who digitized his old notebooks, archiving them for students and teachers to access around the world. Sometimes they sat in coffee shops together, going through old pages. She'd read a quote aloud and shake her head in awe. "You really wrote this under a bridge?" she asked once. "I wrote it because I was under a bridge," Elijah answered. Their bond wasn't mentor and student. It was survivor and survivor, voice and echo, light and reflection. As the 5th anniversary of Words on the Wind approached, Elijah stood again at the original wall outside the old theater, the one where Jade had found his first public quote. The building had since been restored. A plaque was installed beside the wall, explaining its history. Tourists took pictures. Locals walked by with a quiet nod of respect. He stepped up to the wall one more time, and with fresh chalk he wrote, "If you're reading this, you're still becoming. Keep going." He drew the flame, and he smiled. The auditorium in downtown Helena was packed to the last row. Not for a concert, not for a political rally, but for a voice. Tonight marked the launch of Elijah Cross's first published book, a collection of quotes, essays, and reflections titled The Man Beneath the Bridge. It wasn't just a memoir. It was a map for anyone who had ever been silenced, discarded, or broken down by life's weight. The book had gone viral before it even hit the shelves. Not because of marketing hype, but because people were hungry for real stories, for truth, for hope written in scars. The room was silent as Elijah stepped onto the stage. He wore a simple charcoal blazer, no tie. Just a pin on his lapel, an ember-shaped flame. The same one that now appeared on murals, websites, school walls, and even tattoos across the country. He paused at the podium. "I was once a man with everything," he began. "And then I became a man with nothing." A quiet murmur moved through the crowd. Not shock, recognition. "But the nothingness taught me something success never did. That worth isn't proven by what you build or what you lose. It's revealed when no one is watching, and you choose to speak anyway." His voice was firm, calm, like a river that had found its course. "I didn't plan to become a speaker. I didn't plan to become a symbol. I only planned to survive. And in surviving, I discovered that pain, when spoken aloud, becomes purpose. That words, when gifted freely, become bridges. He closed the book in front of him, lifted his eyes. I'm not just the flame. I am Elijah Cross. And before I was a symbol, I was a man sleeping in the cold. Before I was a quote, I was a voice no one heard. And now, I speak not because the world listens, but because someone, somewhere, still needs a reason to keep walking. The standing ovation that followed wasn't explosive. It was slow, a swell, a rising tide of people connecting to something deeper than applause. They weren't just clapping for a man, they were clapping for themselves. For every time they kept going. For every quiet act of resilience. For every time they too had been the one beneath the bridge. In the months that followed, the man beneath the bridge became more than a book. It became curriculum in schools, therapy groups, and even recovery centers. Elijah's story was taught not as a tale of redemption, but as a roadmap to rediscovering worth. He traveled more now, but never stayed away from Helena for long. His office, tucked inside a repurposed train depot, had only 2 items hanging on the wall: a framed copy of Jade's first letter, and the original quote he wrote on that icy night years ago. There is a fire in you that no storm can drown. He would often visit that wall again, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. He would stand before it, hand in his pocket, smile soft. The city was different now. More connected. More aware. More open. But what hadn't changed, what never would, was the truth that saved him. That no matter how far you fall, your voice can still rise. That beneath the coldest bridge, a fire can begin. And that from one man's broken silence, an entire world can be warmed. The end. 4. The importance of purpose over material success. Elijah's fall from wealth to homelessness is a central plot point in the story, and it serves as a potent reminder of how fleeting material success can be. At his peak, Elijah had built a thriving company, Arden Labs, which promised to change the world. Yet, when the company collapsed, so did his sense of identity. For a time, he believed that his worth was tied to his professional success and his financial status. It was only when he lost everything that he began to realize that his true value came not from what he had built, but from who he was as a person. Lesson. True purpose is not found in material success, but in the ability to help others and to contribute to the world around us. When Elijah began writing his messages on the walls, he stopped chasing success and focused instead on meaning. His purpose became about reaching others, offering them hope, encouragement, and connection. This shift from ambition for wealth to ambition for purpose is a crucial aspect of his transformation. The story challenges the modern obsession with status, wealth, and outward success. Elijah's personal awakening teaches us that fulfillment and joy are found in relationships, in the impact we have on others, and in the ways we contribute to the world around us, rather than in our financial or material accomplishments. 5. The impact of community and shared storytelling. One of the most powerful moments in Elijah's story is when he begins to hear from others who have been touched by his words. His message spreads not because he actively sought fame, but because it resonated with people who shared in his pain, his struggles, and his desire to overcome. The community around him grows, and the flame that Elijah sparked spreads to others, who, in turn, start sharing their own stories of resilience and survival. Lesson. The power of storytelling lies not in the story itself, but in the way it connects us to others. By sharing his story, Elijah unknowingly created a community of like-minded individuals, all of whom had experienced some form of hardship or challenge. Storytelling, when shared openly and honestly, can form the basis for a collective healing. It brings people together, creating a network of support and shared experience that makes individuals feel less isolated. In this way, the story of Elijah highlights the importance of community in overcoming adversity. It reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles, that others have walked similar paths, and that by sharing our experiences, we create spaces for others to heal, to learn, and to grow alongside us. 6. The importance of personal accountability in the face of struggle. Throughout the story, Elijah's character is shaped by his willingness to take responsibility for his past decisions. While he was a victim of circumstances, betrayed by business partners and torn down by the very system he trusted, he does not place blame on others for his misfortune. Instead, he takes ownership of his life, acknowledging both his mistakes and his triumphs. This level of personal accountability is essential for healing and growth. Lesson. Taking responsibility for our actions, even when life feels unfair, is crucial to personal transformation. Elijah could have chosen to remain bitter, to wallow in self-pity and blame others for his downfall. Instead, he chose to accept what had happened, to learn from his mistakes, and to use his experience as a foundation for his comeback. His decision to take responsibility not only allowed him to rebuild his life, but it also gave him the clarity and peace needed to move forward. Personal accountability is not about accepting blame for things beyond our control, but about acknowledging our role in the events of our lives. When we own our choices, we unlock the power to change our circumstances and shape our futures. 7. The healing power of vulnerability. Throughout the story, Elijah displays incredible vulnerability. He allows himself to be seen not as a perfect, polished entrepreneur, but as a flawed, struggling man who is trying to find his way. This vulnerability is essential to his growth, both as a person and as a source of inspiration for others. By sharing his pain, his fears, and his mistakes, he gives others permission to do the same. Lesson: vulnerability is not a weakness, but a strength. By showing his true self, both the strength and the fragility, Elijah allows others to connect with him on a deeper level. Vulnerability fosters authenticity, which is often what people need most. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we open the door to deeper connection, healing, and growth. Vulnerability invites empathy and understanding, qualities that are crucial in both personal relationships and community building. Conclusion. In conclusion, the story of the man beneath the bridge teaches us profound lessons about resilience, voice, purpose, and the power of words. Elijah Cross's journey reminds us that no matter how low we may fall, we have the power to rise again. We can use our voices to heal ourselves and others, build community, and redefine our purpose. And in doing so, we create not just change but transformation. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey through the man beneath the bridge. Elijah's story reminds us that no matter how far we fall, there is always the possibility of rising again. It's not our circumstances that define us, but the strength and resilience we carry within. We hope that his words have inspired you to embrace your own journey, no matter how difficult it may seem. If Elijah's message resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that uplift, motivate, and inspire. We invite you to explore our other videos where you'll find more stories of hope, perseverance, and lessons that can help guide you through life's challenges. If you have any thoughts or reflections from today's story, please leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your take and continue the conversation. Thanks again for watching, and remember, your voice matters, your story is important, and you have the power to change the world.